Coming up, from politics to policy, we hear from tribal leaders, past and present, in this special edition celebrating President's Day. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Stay tuned for those interviews on the ICT Newscast.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. ASU offers the only online undergraduate digital media literacy degree, teaching students how to recognize and combat inaccuracies on all platforms. They are using cutting-edge tools and tactics to separate fact from fiction in a digital world overloaded with misinformation. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Ku'watsi Hopa. Thank you for joining us and happy President's Day. Today we'll be highlighting Indigenous leaders throughout Indian Country. It has been 1 year since Christina Haswood was sworn into office to represent District 10 in the Kansas State Legislature. At age 26 at the time, she was the youngest in her role.
It's been amazing to be a part of the change, and it's amazing to see how the other Indigenous lawmakers across the country that before my time, have laid this groundwork for me to be here today. They broke a lot of glass ceilings across the country for my name and for my background to be, on the ticket. To have 3 of us in the state legislature, I think a lot of Indigenous policy has moved forward. So one of them is HB 2001, I believe, which is changing Columbus Day into Indigenous Peoples Day. Historically, that bill has been introduced into the Kansas State Legislature from multiple years, but somehow with us in the legislature last year, all 3 of us, it got a hearing. So a lot of this Indigenous policy is continuing moving closer and closer, but it also gives us a seat at the table, a voice on issues that historically have not had that Indigenous voice.
Haswood is one of 3 Indigenous Kansas state legislators.
I'm in the southeast of Lawrence, Kansas, and actually Haskell Nations University is in my district. My district, House District, there's 125 Kansas House districts, and mine is one of the highest percentage in urban Native American population due to Haskell being there. And also I'm part of that statistic as well. And it's a unique environment where not only does that population reflect in my statistics, but also in the city of Lawrence, where they're starting to now focus on Native American economics and business and trying to empower entrepreneurialism. And it's really great to just have that representation come forth.
That was Kansas State Representative Christina Haswood. Cynthia Chavez Lamar is making history. She is the National Museum of the American Indians' first female director.
Well, from NMAI's inception, there has been this focus on outreach to tribes and other Native and Indigenous communities across the Western Hemisphere. And of course, in the last 2 years with the pandemic, the museum has really pushed to have more of a digital and online presence. So we will continue to pursue those types of programs and exhibits that are available digitally. The collection is also available online, not in its entirety right now, but we are moving towards it completely being available online. But anybody today can go to our website and search the collection and see a good portion of what we have in the collection. And we also have exhibits available online. I also want to note that we in the last 5-6 years or so, we're very also invested in loans to tribal museums and cultural centers, in the effort to bring those collections closer to their communities of origin. We just recently completed a large loan to the First Americans Museum in Oklahoma City. And we look forward to doing more loans with tribal museums and cultural centers.
Chavez Lamar talks about how her childhood impacts her life today.
When I look back at my youth and where I come from, Gacha, San Felipe Pueblo, I'm just very, very thankful for what the community and my elders and my family have instilled in me in terms of values and beliefs. And, that's what's helped keep me strong throughout my entire career, and from being away from going from gotcha, that's hard. And I just say to, those young kids out there, believe in yourself, draw strength from where you come from, because that's so important, in terms of our representation. We have to be who we are in any position that we're in. So I just say, be strong, believe in yourself, and just keep moving forward.
The new director talked about educating the public.
Well, I'm very invested in collaboration and partnership with Indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. Throughout my career, that's been sort of the hallmarks of my practice. So, of course, that's something that I look forward to continuing to encourage and promote at the museum. And in doing so, really will help raise the visibility of Indigenous perspectives and interpretations of our histories, our cultures, and arts.
That was Cynthia Chavez Lamar. When we come back, learn more from the nation's top professional organization for Indigenous journalists. The Native American Journalists Association is the nation's leading professional organization for Indigenous journalists. Its mission is to support Native journalists and to hold the media accountable for reporting responsibly on Native communities. Francine Compton is a two-term president of NAJA, and she joins us now to share more updates from the organization.
Well, the next conference is going to go ahead as planned. We want to be able to provide this for our members. We want to be able to get together. We've postponed it for a couple of years now, and we really are looking forward to having that gathering. I've actually phrased this as it's like a gathering of nations for journalists. That was the feeling that I had the last conference when it was in Minnesota, and I really look forward to us doing that again. I know a lot of people are probably thinking conference in person, maybe not right now, but we're doing this in August. We are monitoring COVID regulations as they're evolving. And today is actually a deadline. Today is a deadline for anyone to submit conference proposals. And so we're really getting everything, our ducks in a row for that conference. Our conference committee is working very hard on that. And while I have your time, I just want to jump right to it and get everything out there. I have very exciting news to share with you this morning that we've voted in favor of hosting our next conference in 2023 in Winnipeg, Canada.
Compton tells us what it's like to take part in a NAJA conference.
Another great question, Aaliyah. I'm so glad that you asked that because I haven't had a chance to really express that point of view. When I was a young journalist, I was getting in my training. I went to my first journalism conference, and it was the Canadian Association of Journalists. I flew out to a big city, and I was surrounded by all of these big journalists and people who've been in the industry for so long. And I really felt quite intimidated. I was looking for where is my place among this conference, which seminars do I fit into, and what kind of networking am I going to do here? So I really struggled to find my place within that conference. And that is not to say that it wasn't a great conference. I just had a different experience when I went to my first NAJA conference in Minnesota. It really felt like a gathering of nations. I felt pride when the drum groups came out. I felt pride to see powwow dancers. And in a big giant room filled with Indigenous journalists being honored for all of their great work.
That was Francine Compton. The U.S. Supreme Court is reconsidering the landmark case McGirt versus Oklahoma. Cherokee Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. tells us what this means for Oklahoma tribes.
It's worth remembering what McGirt is really about at its core. And what McGirt is really about is whether the United States ought to keep its promise to Indian tribes. That's a very basic proposition that I think all of Indian country supports. Really, the whole country should support, because this ought to be a country that keeps its word. So let's remember that McGirt was about the removal treaties that removed the 5 tribes from their original homelands to what is now Oklahoma. And the question was whether the Congress had done enough to break that promise when it imposed the state of Oklahoma over these tribal lands. The Supreme Court in July of 2020 said the Congress had not gone so far as to break those promises. That's really important. And so the governor, since that time, Governor Kevin Stitt, has really been on a mission to undermine the McGirt decision, to paint a picture of chaos that's breaking out on tribal lands. It's really a regressive way of thinking, and it's at odds with the facts. So to go back to the Supreme Court and ask the Supreme Court to have America break its promise, that was really breathtaking. But I'm so glad that the Supreme Court wouldn't even entertain the idea. And that's, I think, very important. So it reaffirms that the United States ought to keep its promise to Indian tribes. I think that's very important.
The state of Oklahoma argues that the judicial system can't handle the caseload.
Well, it's at odds with the facts. I mean, we've put over $30 million new dollars into our criminal justice system. So we've hired more prosecutors, more members of our police force, which is our Cherokee Nation Marshal Service, more staff in our victim protection services. I've appointed more district judges. So we're handling the caseload. I mean, think about it. The state of Oklahoma had 113 years to create a criminal justice system. The Cherokee Nation has had really a matter of months, and I think we've done well. But you got to remember that the governor of the state of Oklahoma, when he went into the Supreme Court the first time, the state painted this picture that you can't possibly trust these tribes to do the job. So they began from a position that we couldn't be trusted. We couldn't fulfill our obligations. They even put something in their original brief that showed the skyline of the city of Tulsa and basically questioned, how could this be an Indian reservation, as if tribes couldn't possibly operate in urban areas. I mean, it's really offensive. So they start from that viewpoint, and then they start to paint a picture of chaos from there. So they seize on a few cases here or there where, let's face it, when there's a dramatic shift in criminal jurisdiction, there are going to be some difficulties, and there were some difficulties. But by and large, on a day-to-day basis, we're operating and meeting our obligation. I mean, the really hard work of policing, that's going on. The really challenging work of prosecuting criminals and doing it in a fair way, that's going on every day in the Cherokee Nation. Thousands of cases. We've had over 3,000 cases transferred to the Cherokee Nation. So we're meeting that obligation. If you talk to people on the front lines, again, those prosecutors, those police officers, people involved in the system, they'll tell you that we're meeting our obligation. If you talk to people like the governor, who began from an idea that we couldn't possibly be trusted because we're Indians, well, of course, he's going to say we're failing. It's just not true.
That was Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. When we return, more on a land-back victory for one Massachusetts tribe. Late last year, the Interior Department ruled that roughly 320 acres of Mashpee Wampanoag land will stay in its control. Chairman Brian Whedon joins us to talk about the progress of his nation.
This all started back in the 70s. The Mashpee Wampanoag Tribal Council was formed because at the time we had seen a lot of developers moving into our ancestral territory and taking some of our lands that we used as common lands to hunt and fish and gather and exercise our Aboriginal rights and our sovereignty. In the 70s, we sued the town of Mashpee for our land. And one of the reasons why we lost that case is because we were not federally recognized at the time. We were federally recognized in 2007. So this has been a battle and a fight for well over, 30 years that we've been working towards to restore some of our ancestral homelands. So this is a start in the right direction to rebuilding our nation.
Chairman Whedon shares his reaction to the land return.
The reaction was very bittersweet. I thought about all of our ancestors and elders that started that tribal council and the reason why, we have our connection to our land. When we introduce ourselves in our language, we say New Tomas, and New Tomas literally means my blood and my bones is from this land. When you eat and you drink from the land, you are the land and the land is you. And that's why we're proud to be Mashpee Wampanoag. We're proud of coming from the Wampanoag Nation, but Mashpee is a special place. And we think about all of our ancestors and all of our relations that have paid the ultimate sacrifice for us.
That was Mashpee Wampanoag Chairman Brian Whedon. At age 84, Peterson Zaw's long career spans many sectors. Recently, Zaw sat down with Navajo freelancer Janie Parrish. She asked him what stood out for him in his career.
One of them is probably the development of the Permanent Fund for the Navajo Nation. As you know, the Navajo Nation lived off mineral lease income. They make mineral leases with companies such as coal and all of the other minerals that we have here on the res, including the one that I think that did a devastating job in a negative way, which is the uranium. And so they lived off the annual income of those companies making the lease payment that they have with the Navajo Nation. So when I became the tribal chair, I've heard a lot of complaints about some of those companies, and it will take you to a position that you need to establish, which is that maybe that's not a way to build a nation, because what we're trying to do on a Navajo is really build a nation that we like to work with. And so we decided as a group that what we should do is establish a permanent fund. That way we don't have to rely on income from mineral leases from companies, and we'll have our own money that we can generate through interest earned each year, and then leave the principal in safe places with the banks and trust companies. And that way we have a steady income that comes in each year to do the project that we need to do.
The education of Navajo youth is important to President Zaw.
When you talk with young people, what they say is, I want my leader in my community and my tribal leader to create a job for me and then put me in those positions and pay me at the same time. You can't have that attitude, because Navajo Nation is still a developing nation. We're still trying to define all of those necessities that we need to have right away. And growing nations do that. They weren't always in place. People have a tendency to think that the United States government was always here for the last 2,000 or 3,000 years. No, they didn't. We had to develop that. So you have to look at Navajo Nation the same way. Navajo Nation is a young nation. A lot of young people. The median age, I think, is somewhere in the mid-20s. So we still have to help develop the Navajo Nation. And so therefore you can't come back and you say, well, I want my consul delegate to develop a job for me. Yeah, that is his responsibility, but we shouldn't expect them to do it. You come back to the reservation, you talk to the people, and you look around, and you know what's needed. Your duty is to then say to yourself, what can I do to help? What can I do to help? And that's important.
Zaw reflected on the Grand Canyon Trust Award.
Well, one has to feel good when they are helping somebody. You have to have a passion for that. You can't say to yourself, well, they gave me all this problem. Here's the way I'm going to solve it my way. You can't do that. You have to work with them. You have to also encourage them. The concept that they're able and capable and have the resources to resolve some of those issues. And so you put it back on them and say, okay, why don't we look at it? We, not me. And I think to people, that's really, really important.
That was former Navajo Nation President Peterson Zaw. Dr. Don Warren's mission is to train Indigenous people in health fields. Patty Thalahongva spoke with the Associate Dean at the School of Medicine and Health Sciences at the University of North Dakota.
Exactly, yeah. Indians into Medicine, or InMed, has been around since 1973. So we're getting close to our 50-year anniversary. And we're very pleased that we've had over 260 American Indian and Alaska Native medical school graduates out of InMed programming. So really feel like we're doing our part trying to increase the numbers of American Indian physicians. And if you look at the most recent census data, there's about 9.7 million American Indian and Alaska Native people. And unfortunately, we're only about 0.4% of physicians, even though we're over 2% of the US population. So very underserved in terms of the medical community. And we know that people tend to work with communities where they are from. So we need more of us to go into medicine and related health fields.
Indigenous communities all over the world share some of the same issues.
And I think that's why it's so important to have more of our own people going into health sciences, whether it's clinical care or research or any other field, quite honestly. I think that lived experience is so valuable in the healthcare setting, but also in the educational setting, in the business setting, and recognizing that that shared history and the impact of colonization on Indigenous peoples that has common outcomes across populations. So we see similar health disparities and similar social challenges when we're looking at Indigenous people in the US, Canada, Australia, the Pacific Islands, pretty much anywhere. So the impact of colonization and subsequent historical trauma has an intergenerational impact. So one of the projects that we recently got funded through the National Institutes of Health to establish the Indigenous Trauma and Resilience Research Center. So we're looking at the negative impact of trauma, but I think even more importantly, looking at the strengths-based and positive impact of resilience and cultural connectedness. So it's not just about documenting the disparity. We need to develop new programs that are going to improve outcomes. And I really believe that's rooted in our cultural connectedness.
Tell us about the new PhD program in Indigenous health.
One of the things that we recognize is that in the research community, first of all, there's not enough American Indians in health research. And we don't seem to be asking the right questions, generally speaking, because we don't have enough people with lived experience in tribal communities conducting the research. So in my experience, when we have people who really come from the community and really understand some of the challenges that we face, we can conduct better research, we can develop better hypotheses, and we can do a better job at identifying solutions. So that's really the purpose of the PhD. So it's the first of its kind in the world. It's a PhD in Indigenous health. And I'm so pleased we've hired 8 Indigenous health scholars to join us on our team. And among the 8 of us, we have nearly 200 years of experience in Indigenous health. So the team has been wonderful. And we also have some non-Indigenous faculty members that are tremendous allies and champions for the cause. So.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For more news and updates, visit IndianCountryToday.com. From the ICT Newsroom, stay safe, my relatives. I am Aaliyah Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.